All right. Up next, we have Lan N.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for sticking around towards the latter half of the day. I'm happy to be presenting our work on how we use participatory systems thinking approaches to help us develop a better understanding of community-engaged research as a complex system. So as many of you know, equity has become a central theme in modern public health research, which has led to increased efforts to include historically marginalized communities using approaches like community-based participatory research. However, sustaining community-engaged research faces significant challenges, some of those being institutional barriers, scant resources, as well as difficulties maintaining community involvement and trust in a long-term partnership. So for our project goals, we aim to shed light on this complex system of community-engaged research with a particular focus on uncovering drivers of and barriers to sustainability of community-engaged research. So for folks who are not familiar, systems thinking is a type of operational thinking that allows us to improve understanding of different parts of how a system influence one another within the whole. So in systems thinking, causes and effects are characterized by a structure of interconnected variables and feedback loops, rather than what we typically see as linear unidirectional causes and effects. This framework is particularly useful because it helps us understand complex problems. So for systems thinking, we can understand the systems in which research is happening. And then for meta research, we are trying to understand how do we improve the methods and outcomes and approaches for a particular study. A common tool that we use in systems thinking is called causal loop diagrams. So it's a way to depict complex systems. Causal loop diagrams are also known as CLDs. It's a visual representation of the hypothesized causal relationships between variables and the feedback loops within a system. So an example of a causal loop diagram is to your right, and the main components are variables, which are the named objects of the figures, the arrows, which show the relationships between the variables, and then feedback loops, which are closed series of variable connections. So I'm going to now walk you through the timeline of study activities for those who aren't familiar with group model building and what the process entails. So for all of our activities, the same participants were drawn from a pool of principal investigators, PIs, and study staff who had experience conducting community-engaged research. So everyone was from an academic institution and had experience working with underrepresented communities in research. So we started with a process of data that we collected through key informant interviews, which then we analyzed. And then we identified 5 feedback loops in this preliminary causal loop diagram, or the CLD. We then had 2 group model building sessions where we invited back PIs and study staff to basically look at our preliminary causal loop diagram and then have a facilitated discussion to understand what are the ways that we can improve sustainability of specific topics. From these group model building sessions, we were able to identify 13 new feedback loops and 27 points, and specifically related to policy recommendations around sustainability for community-engaged research. Our last activity was a plenary session where we again invited everyone back to then discuss, based on our discussion and our updated causal loop diagram, can you provide feedback on the updates? And can you rank these priorities? So we had all of the participants rank the recommendations based on their priority for implementation. And now we're here where we are finalizing the policy agenda and disseminating results. So this is, again, what an example of what a causal loop diagram can look like. So this is the preliminary causal loop diagram that we had developed based on our analysis of the key informant interviews. So you can see here that there are 5 feedback loops highlighted in yellow, all of which center around this authentic researcher community partnerships. So how we might be able to read this is, for example, the loops in red are called reinforcing loops. So what this shows are, you can interpret them as drivers of systems change. So for example, if there is, if the community becomes more involved in the research process, then research programs will increase prioritization of community needs, which then builds authentic partnerships between researchers and community members, which then also increases community involvement in the research process. The next type of loops that we can look at, they are called balancing loops. They're labeled by the Bs. How you might be able to interpret this is the loop B1 shows that more authentic partnerships, may put researchers in a challenging position where they are having to prioritize different timelines, working with different partners, which then decreases their research productivity and then decreases the potential resources and funding that are available to conduct this research, which then makes it harder to conduct research in the community. So this is just an example of, like, you can interpret all of these loops, but really it's to understand this larger system of how community engaged research is working. The preliminary causal loop diagram, we then had people come back for group model building sessions. These were basically facilitated discussions where we prompted participants around 3 topics: institutional barriers, funding, and authentic partnerships. So these were the 3 topics that we found to be most important in the preliminary causal loop diagram. So for institutional barriers, we asked participants to provide recommendations for how research institutions can better support the conduct of community engaged research. For funding, for example, we asked participants to recommend how funding mechanisms should be modified to better fit the nature of community engaged research. Underlying these discussions we had during the group model building sessions, we did ask specific opportunities. We asked participants opportunities for addressing the academic culture. So again, out of all of the GMB sessions, we identified 13 new loops to add on to the preliminary causal loop diagram. And then we identified 27 specific recommendations for different points in the causal loop diagram. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to go over everything, but I am going to go over the institutional barrier subsystem. So for this subsystem, we had identified 4 new sets of feedback loops. So this first one here shows recruitment and retention of community engaged research faculty. So we see that when we are able to recruit and retain community engaged research faculty, it helps to sustain research productivity and the grants awarded to sustain community engaged research, which makes sense. The black loops show how burnout leads to the attrition of community engaged researchers. So we know that community engaged research can be very taxing, especially in the publish or perish environment of academia. So what this loop shows is that there are administrative rules and processes that are at odds with effective community engaged research that push researchers to burnout. So again, it shows the effect of burnout on the attrition of community engaged researchers and productivity. However, one of the potential means of tackling burnout is through an institutional culture shift, right? Which is shown in the red loops here. So as the institution increases their knowledge of community engaged research, it potentially then creates a shift in the rules and processes that allow us to conduct community engaged research successfully. And then it reduces administrative burdens, which then makes the entire process of community engaged research better. This last loop was identified again in the group model building sessions, but it shows that tenure and promotion of community-based researchers increases the recognition of what community engaged research can allow for, and then it increases then the merits and the funding of community-based research. This shows, I had mentioned there were 27 recommendations. This is like a very quick overview of the project, but what the boxes in yellow highlight is just a few recommendations that were brought up and how they interface in the system. So all of these variables represent an opportunity for us to enact systems change. And depending on where the the recommendation intervenes, you can have a greater or lesser impact. I had also mentioned that one of the activities in our final plenary session was having participants rank the 27 strategies based on priority. So we had them rank it based on their impact and feasibility in the grand scheme of like all of the recommendations. Here I show the top ranked strategies within each domain. Some of these directly impact the feedback loop that I had shared earlier. So for example, for institutional barriers, the top strategy was to implement flexible research payment rules for community partners. This includes simplifying reimbursement and billing processes. For funding, participants identified the need for expanding and streamlining grant opportunities for community partners, allowing them to become the primary applicants and recipients of grants. So again, this is contextualizing the different recommendations and the different processes that are under community engaged research into a complex system. So what did we accomplish? Through this project, we were able to engage study staff and principal investigators who are actively engaged with conducting community engaged participatory research with underrepresented communities. We are able to visualize the complex system of community engaged research to then identify 27 unique recommendations, which please keep an eye out for the upcoming paper that we're hoping to submit soon. But it helped us then find potential levers for systems change. And again, this is like one specific project where system science is being applied to a project, but the methods are meant to be adaptable to your project. It's meant to engage different stakeholders and be applied to the local context. So it is something that can be used as long as you have a modeler. So with that, I will thank the research team here. This is this project that was led by Dr. Stella Yee, who's in the crowd. All of the causal loop diagrams were done by Rachel Thompson, who's a PhD candidate at CUNY and on the job market. But with that, thank you.